cowboy in a Stetson sits astride a hydrogen bomb as it drops from the belly of a B-52. He whoops. He waves his hat over his head like he is riding a bronco at a rodeo. And he rides that bomb all the way down, shearing toward the target that will end the world. It is one of the most famous images in the history of movies, and it comes from a comedy about the accidental end of all human life. That is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, released in 1964 and directed by Stanley Kubrick. It stars Peter Sellers playing 3 different characters, a war room built to look like the fate of the Earth is being gambled away over a poker game, and a nuclear apocalypse played for laughs at the tensest moment of the Cold War. It was nearly buried by a national tragedy. It almost ended in a custard pie fight, and it became one of the greatest satires ever put on film. This is how they built it, what they cut, and how a joke about Armageddon turned into a masterpiece. 20 facts, counting down. Fact 20. Peter Sellers plays 3 different characters and was meant to play 4. Dr. Strangelove is built around one astonishing performance, or rather 3 of them. Peter Sellers plays 3 completely different characters in the same film. He is Group Captain Lionel Mandrake, the buttoned-up British officer trying to reason with a lunatic. He is President Merkin Muffley, the meek American leader apologizing to the Soviet premier over the phone. And he is Dr. Strangelove himself, the grinning ex-Nazi scientist in the wheelchair. Sellers switches accents, postures, and entire personalities, sometimes sharing the frame with himself. But the studio wanted even more. Columbia Pictures agreed to finance the film on one condition, that Sellers play at least 4 major roles. In their eyes, Sellers filling multiple parts was a big reason Kubrick's previous film, Lolita, had worked. So the plan was for Sellers to also play Major T.J. King Kong, the B-52 pilot who rides the bomb at the end. It didn't happen, and we will get to why. What matters is the achievement that remains. For his triple performance, Peter Sellers became the first actor ever nominated for a single Academy Award, for Best Actor, for playing 3 different characters in one film. One man, 3 faces, and the entire tone of the movie balanced on his shoulders. Fact 19. Peter Sellers was paid more than half the entire budget. Playing 3 roles did not just win Peter Sellers acclaim, it won him a staggering payday. Sellers was paid $1 million for his work on Dr. Strangelove. To put that in perspective, that single fee came to about 55% of the film's entire budget. More than half of everything Stanley Kubrick had to spend went to one actor, because that one actor was doing the work of several. Columbia had insisted on Sellers precisely because his versatility was seen as the film's main commercial draw. Kubrick had a famous joke about the arrangement. Since Sellers was playing multiple parts for that fee, you might say the studio got several actors for the price of one. But Kubrick flipped it, quipping, "I got 3 for the price of 6. A wry admission that Sellers, for all his genius, did not come cheap, and the money bought real range. In a single film, Sellers is the stiff upper lip Group Captain Mandrake trying to wrestle a recall code out of a madman. The timid President Muffley apologizing down a phone line to a drunk Soviet premier, and the cackling Dr. Strangelove fighting his own rebellious arm. 3 performances, 1 salary that swallowed the budget, and a bargain the director pretended to grumble about. Fact 18. Kubrick tricked George C. Scott into his most over-the-top scenes. General Buck Turgidson, the gum-chewing, war-hungry Air Force chief, is one of the funniest performances in the film, and George C. Scott hated how he got there. Scott knew Dr. Strangelove was a comedy, but he wanted to play Turgidson with some restraint. Director Stanley Kubrick had other ideas. Kubrick coaxed him into wild, cartoonish, exaggerated takes. The eye-rolling, the arm-waving, the manic grin, by promising they were only warm-up exercises that would never be used in the final cut. They were used. Kubrick printed the broadest, silliest takes he could get, and those were the ones in the movie. Watch Turgidson practically bounce around the war room acting out a Soviet attack, and you are watching a performance Scott thought no one would ever see. When Scott realized he had been played, he was furious, and swore he would never work with Stanley Kubrick again. He never did. But there was another side to their relationship. Both men were serious chess players, and between setups on set they would face off over a board, settling creative arguments across the chessboard. Kubrick, a chess hustler in his younger days in New York, usually won. Years later, Scott made peace with it, calling Turgidson one of the performances he was proudest of. Fact 17. The general who starts World War III is obsessed with fluoride. The whole catastrophe is set off by one man, Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper, played by Sterling Hayden. Ripper launches an unauthorized nuclear strike on the Soviet Union because he has become convinced of a bizarre conspiracy theory. He believes that water fluoridation is a communist plot to poison Americans and sap what he calls his precious bodily fluids. He explains, deadly serious, that he first noticed it during The Physical Act of Love. It is one of the great deranged monologues in film, delivered by Hayden with total conviction while chomping a cigar in his darkened office. Here is the part that grounds it. That conspiracy was not invented by Kubrick for laughs. In the real America of the late 1950s and early 1960s, a group called the John Birch Society, founded in 1958, genuinely promoted the idea that fluoridating public water was a communist scheme. In some towns, fluoridation was actually banned. Kubrick was satirizing a real paranoia that was loose in the country, and getting Hayden to play Ripper was its own coup. Sterling Hayden had essentially retired from acting, and Kubrick coaxed him back for his first film role in 5 years. The man who ends the world on screen had to be talked out of retirement to do it. Fact 16. The B-52 cockpit was rebuilt from a single magazine photo. The seams inside Major Khan's bomber look completely authentic, and they had to be faked from almost nothing. In the early 1960s, the B-52 was cutting-edge military hardware, and its interior layout was classified. The Pentagon had already refused to give the production any help at all after reading Kubrick's script. So the film's designers had almost nothing to work from. According to the production, they reconstructed the entire B-52 cockpit from a single photograph that had appeared in a British aviation magazine, filling in the rest with educated guesses. The result was so accurate it caused a scare. When American Air Force personnel were later shown the movie's bomber set, they reportedly said it was a perfect copy of the real thing. That was not entirely good news. Stanley Kubrick became genuinely worried that his design team, led by Ken Adam, had somehow obtained classified information, and that the production could be investigated by the FBI for espionage. Think about that. A movie set was so convincing that the director feared a federal investigation. All of it was built from one magazine picture and a lot of clever assumption, just to put you inside a nuclear bomber that the government would not let anyone see. Fact 15. Dr. Strangelove was stitched together from several real Cold War figures. The film's title character appears late and steals the whole movie. A wheelchair-using former Nazi scientist whose black-gloved arm keeps trying to snap into a Hitler salute. So who was he? Dr. Strangelove was modeled on a collection of real people. The strongest influence was rocket scientist Wernher von Braun, the German V-2 designer who ended up building rockets for the United States. Traces of others are in there too. The Rand Corporation strategist Herman Kahn, the mathematician John von Neumann, who used a wheelchair late in his life, and hydrogen bomb physicist Edward Teller. Many people assume Strangelove was based on Henry Kissinger, but Sellers always denied it, and in 1964, Kissinger was still a fairly obscure Harvard professor. The film's central nightmare came from real strategy, too. The Doomsday Machine, a device that automatically destroys the world if the Soviet Union is attacked, was not pure fantasy. Herman Kahn had discussed exactly such a machine in his 1960 book On Thermonuclear War, as a way of illustrating the insane logic of mutually assured destruction. Kahn's fear was that the military might hear the idea and actually want to build one. Kubrick took that terrifying thought experiment and put it on screen, grinning in a wheelchair. Fact 14. Only one woman appears in the whole film, a Playboy playmate. For a movie packed with generals, presidents, and pilots, Dr. Strangelove has exactly one female character on screen. Her name is Miss Scott, played by Tracy Reed, and she is General Turgidsson's secretary and mistress. We first meet her in a bikini, sunbathing under a lamp, taking a phone call from Turgidson while he is in the bathroom. In some early advertising, she was billed not as Miss Scott, but as Miss Foreign Affairs, and there is a joke buried in that name. Tracy Reed had appeared as the Playmate centerfold in the June 1962 issue of Playboy magazine. And Kubrick works that fact right into the film. Later, aboard the B-52, one of Major Com's crew is flipping through a copy of Playboy, and the centerfold he is leering at is Tracy Reed, the same actress, with a magazine titled Foreign Affairs strategically covering her. It is a small, sly touch, the kind of layered joke Kubrick loved to hide in the frame. One woman, in a film about men blundering their way to Armageddon, and even her single scene is wired with a double meaning. In a story about male ego destroying the planet, that ratio is arguably the sharpest joke of all. Fact 13. Dr. Strangelove's sinister black glove belonged to Kubrick himself. Dr. Strangelove's most unforgettable trait is his right arm, which has a mind of its own. Throughout his scenes, the arm keeps rebelling, snapping into a Nazi salute, trying to strangle its own owner, forcing Strangelove to wrestle it down with his other hand. Peter Sellers largely improvised this, and it is medically real enough to have a name, what is now called alien hand syndrome. But the eerie finishing touch was an accident. Strangelove wears a single black glove on that uncontrollable hand, and that glove came straight from Stanley Kubrick's own pocket. Kubrick had been wearing black gloves on set to handle the hot studio lights without burning himself. Sellers saw them, thought they looked sinister and strange, and asked to wear one for the character. So the glove that makes Strangelove look like a menacing machine man was just the director's protective work glove. That improvised spirit ran through the whole role. Strangelove's famous final moment, when he suddenly rises from his wheelchair and shouts, "Mein Führer, I can walk," was also improvised. Kubrick knew Sellers could rarely repeat himself, so he lined up 6 cameras to catch whatever the actor did, because not even Sellers knew what was coming. A protective glove and a man improvising became one of cinema's greatest villains. Fact 12. The voice of Darth Vader made his film debut in The Bomber. Look closely at the crew of Major Kong's B-52, and you will spot a very young, very famous face making his very first movie. Lieutenant Lothar Zog, the bombardier calmly working the controls inside the plane, is played by James Earl Jones. Dr. Strangelove was his film debut. He is quiet and understated here, just one of the crew keeping the doomed mission running. But the voice is unmistakable once you know it. Kubrick found him almost by accident. He had gone to watch George C. Scott perform in a stage production of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, because he wanted Scott for Turgidson. James Earl Jones happened to be in that same production, and Kubrick, wanting a varied and realistic bomber crew, offered him the role of Zog. From that small beginning in a nuclear satire, Jones went on to one of the most recognizable careers in Hollywood history. He would become the booming voice of Darth Vader in Star Wars, the voice of Mufasa in The Lion King, and a stage and screen legend. But it all started here, in a fake B-52 cockpit built from a magazine photo, flying a hydrogen bomb toward the end of the world. Fact 11. A camera crew accidentally filmed a secret U.S. military base. Some of the film's aerial shots of the B-52 flying low over the frozen Arctic are real footage, and getting them nearly caused an international incident. While a second unit camera crew was capturing aerial plates over Greenland for the bomber sequences, they reportedly flew over and filmed a secret United States military base by accident. The base was not amused. As the story goes, the military grounded the crew's plane and detained them, suspecting that this film crew shooting mysterious aerial footage might actually be Soviet spies. It is a perfect real-life echo of the movie's own paranoia. Here is a production making a satire about Cold War trigger happiness and mutual suspicion, and its own crew gets pulled out of the sky and interrogated on suspicion of spying for the Russians. The same fear that drives General Ripper to launch his bombers. The enemy is everywhere. Everyone is a threat. Reached out and grabs the very people making fun of it. Between this Greenland scare and Kubrick's worry that the FBI might investigate his B-52 set, The making of Dr. Strangelove kept accidentally recreating the exact Cold War hysteria it was mocking. Life kept imitating the satire in the most nerve-wracking way possible. Fact 10. The War Room is one of the most famous sets ever built. When people picture Dr. Strangelove, they picture the War Room, a vast dark chamber with a huge circular table under a glowing ring of light, and an enormous big board map of the world on the wall. It was designed by production designer Ken Adam, who would go on to create the iconic sets of the James Bond films. Adam deliberately made the War Room larger than life, an unreal cavernous space, so that the men deciding the fate of humanity would look tiny and lost inside it. Directors have worshipped it ever since. Steven Spielberg has called it the best set ever made, and Kubrick added a detail nobody in the audience could ever see. He insisted that the giant table be covered in green baize, the felt used on a poker table. The film was shot in black and white, so the color green is completely invisible to the viewer. It made no practical difference on screen at all. But Kubrick wanted the actors sitting around that table to feel, in their bones, that they were playing a giant game of poker for the fate of the world. So the generals and the president gambled over humanity on a poker table, and only the cast ever knew it was green. Fact 9. A real rodeo cowboy replaced Peter Sellers as the bomber pilot. Remember that fourth role Peter Sellers was supposed to play? That was Major T.J. King Kong, the B-52 commander who rides the bomb. Sellers never pulled it off. Accounts vary, but he struggled badly with the broad Texan accent the part needed. And then he injured his ankle, which made working in the cramped cockpit set genuinely difficult. So Sellers was out, and Kubrick had to scramble for a replacement. He first offered Kong to the ultimate movie cowboy, John Wayne, who never even bothered to reply. He tried Dan Blocker from the TV Western Bonanza, whose agent rejected the script with a telegram calling it too pinko. Finally, Kubrick landed on Slim Pickens, a genuine rodeo performer and character actor whose real name was Lewis Burton Lindley Jr. Pickens had spent his life on the rodeo circuit and had barely ever left small-town America, let alone the country. He turned up at the studio in England in his cowboy boots and wide-brimmed Stetson. And he was so perfectly, naturally Kong, the gung-ho, patriotic, corn-pone bomber captain, that the role made him a star. As Pickens put it, after Dr. Strangelove, assistant directors stopped calling him Hey You and started calling him Hey Slim. Fact 8. Slim Pickens was kept in the dark about the whole movie. Slim Pickens gave one of the most committed comic performances in the film, partly because he may not have fully understood what film he was in. Kubrick did not give Pickens the complete script. He was handed only the pages for his own scenes aboard the bomber. So Pickens played Major Kong with total straight-faced sincerity, a patriotic cowboy doing his duty, while everyone around the production knew they were making a pitch-black satire about the end of the world. His co-star, James Earl Jones, said that Pickens was Major Kong on and off the set, and he didn't change a thing about his manner, his language, or his behavior. That authenticity paid off in the film's signature image. When the bomb doors jam, Kong climbs onto the hydrogen bomb to free them and rides it down out of the plane, whooping and waving his Stetson like a bronco rider. Pickens, a real rodeo veteran, made that impossible moment feel completely genuine. It also nearly wore him out through sheer repetition. Kubrick, a famous perfectionist, shot the bomb-riding sequence in just over 100 takes. Years later, offered a role in Kubrick's The Shining, Pickens reportedly agreed only on the condition that Kubrick shoot his scenes in fewer than 100 takes. Fact 7. The film ends with nuclear apocalypse set to a gentle love song. Dr. Strangelove closes on one of the darkest jokes in movie history, and it is built entirely out of music. After the doomsday machine is triggered, the final images are a montage of real nuclear explosions, mushroom clouds blooming one after another. The actual end of the world. And over that footage of total annihilation, Kubrick plays a sweet, tender wartime ballad, Vera Lynn singing We'll Meet Again, a song of hope and reunion laid over the extinction of the human race. The contrast is the whole point. It turns Armageddon into something almost unbearably ironic and calm. Kubrick bookended the film with music like this. It opens, too, on an unexpectedly romantic note. The very first scene shows a B-52 being refueled in midair by another plane, the fueling boom slowly connecting the two aircraft, and it is scored to the soft, swooning standard "Try a Little Tenderness." Two enormous war machines, filmed and scored like lovers meeting. From that tender, sensual opening to that gentle, devastating farewell song at the end, the music is doing something sly the entire time. Kubrick uses the prettiest, warmest songs he can find to score the machinery of mass death. It should not work. It is perfect. Fact 6. President Kennedy's assassination delayed the film's release. Dr. Strangelove was ready to face the public in late 1963, and then history intervened in the worst way. The film's first press screening was scheduled for November 22, 1963. That is the day President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Suddenly, a black comedy in which President Merkin Muffley telephones the Soviet premier to apologize for an accidental nuclear attack felt like the last thing a grieving nation wanted to see. Columbia Pictures made the obvious call. The release was pushed back from December 1963 to the following year, and the film finally opened on January 29, 1964. The timing was already nerve-wracking for another reason. Just over a year earlier, in October 1962, the world had come within a hair of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the exact scenario the film plays for laughs. Audiences in early 1964 were watching a comedy about something that had very nearly happened to them for real, months before, and set in the corridors of an American power that had just been struck by real tragedy. Kubrick had made the most timely film imaginable, and its timeliness became a serious problem. The delay was only the first of several changes the assassination would force on the movie. Some of them were tiny. All of them were telling. Fact 5. Kubrick sued a rival nuclear film to sabotage its release. While Dr. Strangelove was in production, a competitor appeared that could have wrecked it. There was another serious nuclear war film in the works, Failsafe, directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Henry Fonda, a straight, tense drama about an accidental American strike on Moscow. In it, as in Kubrick's film, a bomber crew like Major Combs flies past the point of recall toward a Soviet target. The problem for Kubrick was that Failsafe was based on a novel that closely resembled Red Alert, the book his own film came from, written by Peter George back in 1958. Two very similar doomsday movies were heading for theaters at the same time, and a grim drama might steal the thunder from a comedy on the same subject. So, Kubrick and Peter George took legal action, alleging that the Failsafe novel had plagiarized Red Alert. Kubrick's real aim was not to kill the rival film outright. It was to delay it, so it would not collide with his own. It worked. The lawsuit pushed Failsafe back, and it did not reach cinemas until October 1964, roughly 9 months after Dr. Strangelove. There was a delicious twist, too. The studio that ended up distributing Failsafe was Columbia Pictures, the very same studio releasing Dr. Strangelove. Columbia effectively bought both nuclear films and made sure Kubrick's got there first. Fact 4. The film originally ended with a giant pie fight in the war room. The ending everyone knows, the mushroom clouds and the love song, was not the original plan. Kubrick first shot a completely different finale, an enormous custard pie fight breaking out in the war room. He spent nearly a week filming it. In the sequence, the Soviet ambassador, Alexei Desidesky, played by Peter Bull, hurls a pie at General Turgidson, misses, and hits President Muffley square in the face, knocking him down. Turgidson then cries out that the president has been struck down in his prime, and the whole room descends into a slapstick brawl, generals and diplomats flinging pies at each other while the world ends outside. Kubrick cut it. He decided the scene was too broad and farcical that it tipped the film from razor satire into pure silliness and wrecked the tone of the ending. There is a haunting footnote, too. That line about the president being struck down in his prime would have felt grotesque after President Kennedy's assassination, though Kubrick had reportedly already decided to remove the scene before Kennedy died. The pie fight was locked away and shown publicly only once, decades later, at London's National Film Theatre in 1999, shortly after Kubrick's own death. One of cinema's most legendary deleted scenes, gone by the director's choice. Fact 3. One word of dialogue was secretly changed because of Dallas. After President Kennedy was killed, Kubrick made a tiny surgical edit to the film, and you can still catch it if you watch the actor's mouth. In the bomber, Major Kong opens the aircraft's survival kit and reads out its contents to his crew: gum, lipstick, nylon stockings, prophylactics, and so on. In the version Kong originally filmed, he grins and says the kit is so well stocked that a fella can have a pretty good weekend in Dallas. But Kennedy had just been assassinated in Dallas. A cheerful joke naming that city was suddenly unthinkable, so the line was quietly changed. Slim Pickens was brought back into a studio to re-record just that one word, replacing Dallas with Vegas. So the finished line became a pretty good weekend in Vegas. The overdub was done in a hurry, and it shows. If you watch Slim Pickens' lips closely in that shot, you can clearly see his mouth forming the word Dallas, even though the voice you hear says Vegas. It is a ghost of the original film, hiding in plain sight in every copy ever printed. A single syllable, swapped out of respect for a national tragedy, and preserved forever as a tiny visible blitch on the pilot's lips. Fact 2. A soldier is warned he will have to answer to the Coca-Cola company. Deep in the film's chaos is a small, perfect joke about corporate America surviving even the apocalypse. Group Captain Mandrake has worked out the secret recall code that can stop the bombers and save the world, but he is trapped, out of coins, and desperate to phone the president from a payphone. Nearby stands a Coca-Cola vending machine full of change. Mandrake orders a suspicious army officer, Colonel Bat Guano, played by Keenan Wynn, to shoot the machine open so he can get the money. Guano refuses at first, because even now, with nuclear war minutes away, it is private property. When Guano finally agrees to blast the Coke machine, he delivers a warning that has outlived most of the film's other lines. You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company. He shoots the lock, the change spills out, and the machine promptly sprays a jet of Coke straight into his face, as if punishing him for the sacrilege. It is Kubrick at his most cutting. The world is ending, a man is trying to save all of humanity, and the real anxiety in the room is about respecting the property of a soft drink corporation. In a satire full of enormous targets, that one tiny joke about a vending machine might be the sharpest of them all. Fact 1. The entire film is secretly one long sexual metaphor. Here is the reading that recontextualizes everything you have watched, and Stanley Kubrick confirmed it himself, months after Dr. Strangelove came out. A Cornell University art history professor named LaGrace Benson wrote to Kubrick, suggesting the whole film was structured as an act of sex, a rising sequence of sexual imagery from beginning to end. Kubrick wrote back and agreed. In his words, she was the first to notice the sexual framework, running from the planes going in to the last spasm, which is Major Khan's ride down on the bomb and its climactic detonation. Once you see it, it is everywhere. The film opens with two planes coupling in mid-air during refueling, scored like a love scene. General Ripper triggers the apocalypse over his lost bodily fluids and his impotence. Nearly every name is a sex joke, from Merkin to Mandrake to Turgidson, and it all builds, relentlessly, to that final image from the very start of this video, a cowboy whooping and riding a phallic bomb between his legs as it plunges toward the earth and explodes. Kubrick made a film about the ultimate climax of human aggression, and he built it deliberately as one enormous doomed act of consummation. The end of the world, as the punchline of the dirtiest joke ever filmed, and they never even told most of the audience. And that is 20 facts about Dr. Strangelove, a comedy about the end of the world, built from a magazine photo, a real cowboy, a poker table, and one of the boldest jokes any director ever dared to tell. If you enjoyed this trip into the war room, subscribe for a brand new countdown every week, and tell us in the comments which movie we should stop worrying and learn to love next.